Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believe in a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
That's right. When you don't know what to do, just keep on breathing. From the City of Angels in Los Angeles, and a big Apple welcome in New York City. Welcome to all my listeners out there in Radioland, too. I am Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver, at caregiverdave.com, along with my lovely co-host, Adrienne Gruberg from the Caregiver Space. Say hello, Adrienne. See, she's there. Coming to you live and on demand 24/7 on 25 global audio and video platforms, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Facebook Live, SoundCloud, Blog Talk Radio, and I can go on, 20 more platforms around the world. And we are so proud to be voted numero uno, caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM, and one of the top 6 best podcasts by Caring.com, as well as number 3 podcast out of thousands on Caregiver Podcasts on FeedSpot. Our guest today, Sue Johansen. Welcome to the show, Sue.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's our pleasure. And, my mother had dementia. My mother-in-law had dementia. A Place for Mom was one of the places we called, many, just to get some information. And you don't mind people calling you just to get information, do you?
We do not. A large part of what we do is help educate families. Oftentimes when they're reaching out, this is a category that they have no exposure to. It's not something that you are aware of until you need it. And so we are happy to point them in the right direction, give them some education, and provide some resources.
That's right, and you guys were so gracious. I mean, you didn't make me feel guilty, like, well, I don't know, are you going to come here? Because I won't give you any information if you don't. You didn't have none of that. So
right.
It was very nice. I mean, you treated me like I was a customer, giving you lots of money. And I was milking it for all I could. I got all the free advice I wanted, and you graciously gave it to me. They both ended up staying in their homes until they needed to go into assisted living, which we found one. And then they needed to go into a nursing home. It was a journey. They're both gone now, and I'm glad they're gone, and they're glad they're gone, because it wasn't fun for any of us.
No, it isn't.
It's a terrible, terrible thing.
It is, absolutely.
So I like to ask our guests the first question. Who is Sue Johansen, and why was she put on this earth?
Such a long question. Since we don't have all day, I will narrow it down to, so I'm Sue Johansen. Yeah, as it relates to kind of the caregiver topic, I was put on this earth, I think, to assist my family initially in this journey, and then now to help others navigate it in the best way possible. And I believe that it's a journey that's different for every person. They enter the search at different places, and not not one answer is right for everybody. And so a lot of what we do, as we talked about earlier, is just exposing people to the spectrum of options out there, and helping to determine what's right. And what's right today might not be what's right a year from now or 2 years from now. And so it really is about understanding what your options are at any point in the journey and making the best decision possible.
Yeah, you use a curious word, spectrum, because I think of autism, right? Well, my child has autism. My grandson has autism. And they don't say that anymore. They say, well, he's on the spectrum of autism.
Exactly.
And, it's a circle and it's a diagram. Talk to us about the spectrum of senior living. I get it. It must be just as complicated and plentiful as autistic.
Exactly. Slightly different focus, but absolutely. Really, senior living starts at kind of senior apartments, which are essentially apartments for those 55 and older, and meant to aggregate seniors in an environment where everybody is dealing with the same challenges. And so, there is a sense of community. No care services provided, no meals, no housekeeping. It's simply an apartment. And then
we can go, I'm sorry to interrupting. We can go back even further, and let's start with the home, because maybe they just can stay at home, but they need someone to provide services for 4 hours a day or 8 hours a day. Maybe they need to live there. Maybe they need room and board in exchange, for lowering the cost. So start with the very, very basic, because nobody wants to go out of their home. They lived there for 40, 50 years. And they freak out when their kids, their adult children, are trying to, move them somewhere because they're worried about them. They could fall. Maybe they live far away. So explain from the very beginning. Start with the least intrusive, and then, go up the ladder or the spectrum.
Sure, and that's kind of where I was started. So senior apartments, there's no talk of care, right? You don't need any services at that point. And so that's really, as we view it, the kind of the start of the spectrum of senior living, as you say. And then it goes from there to independent living, and that is kind of like a senior apartment, but you add some services. So there are meals and housekeeping, still no care necessary. Once somebody starts needing care or help with what we call activities of daily living, things like bathing, medication management, just queuing up memory issues, then that opens it up to even further options, right? You mentioned home care. Home care is something that many people choose if they do want to stay in their homes and if their homes are good options for them. You can have somebody come into your home for as little as 2 hours, and all the way up to 24-hour care at home. And so, some things that you want to consider are, is the home the right environment? Is it safe for the senior? Does it maximize, their ability to be cognitively stimulated and, have a good quality of life? And for some people, that's absolutely yes. For other people, they may be in a situation that isn't healthy for them, and so providing care in the home isn't a good option. So then you need some place where you can be residentially, and that starts at, as I said, independent living has some services that you offer. So somebody who may be in their home, not really need help with their activities of daily living, but really isn't cooking for themselves any longer. They may have lost a spouse, and the spouse did all the cooking, and all of a sudden they're challenged with getting nutritious meals. And so living in an independent living community provides the housekeeping and meals, but isn't necessarily a care environment. Once somebody does need help with what we call those activities of daily living, then, assisted living is kind of that next step in that it provides, meals, transportation, housekeeping, but also personal care. And there's a difference between medical care and personal care. And so in an assisted living community, you can get help with things like bathing, queuing for meals, medication management, transfer from sitting to standing, those kinds of things that are care services but not medical care services. And then, of course, for those with cognitive challenges, there are memory care communities that specialize in programming for those with cognitive challenges, Alzheimer's, dementia, and then all the way to a skilled nursing community where you've got medical care available for those invasive needs, somebody with a feeding tube, or if you need insulin-dependent diabetic, that needs injections daily, that kind of environment. So it truly is a spectrum, all the way from, just wanting to get socialization to the heaviest of medical needs.
And is, I'm looking for the word, hospice and palliative care on that spectrum as well?
Hospice and palliative care can be layered into almost all of those environments, right? Certainly in the home environment, at assisted living, in a skilled nursing facility. So palliative and hospice care are really more of an approach towards treatment, and a gathering of resources helping that person, for whom there is a limited amount of time left and they've been given that diagnosis, to help ease both the patient and the family into kind of a humane path.
Yeah. Like I said before, I've spent hours on the phone with you guys and multiple phone calls. What's in it for you? I mean, why do you take the time and spend so much time talking to people who may never choose your services?
Well, I think,
how do you guys make your money,
Yeah, so we make our money when we do place somebody, right? We work with, communities across the country, and that's ultimately where we realize revenue for what we do. But we're also a company who has a mission of, helping to provide services and assistance for families who are facing this challenge. And you don't go through many conversations with families who are at the end of their rope and you are their lifeline without realizing that there's more to this than, just the revenue you can generate. People truly need help navigating this space. And so our senior living advisors who work in local communities across the country are people on average who've been with us for about 5 years, but who have been in senior living for about 12. So they know the senior living world, and they've worked with a lot of families, and they have great empathy for people on this journey. And so that's why we engage and educate, because not only is it the right thing to do, but as I said, today you may not want to engage with us or you may not need our services, but tomorrow you may, or you may talk to a friend, because, those of us who have grown children and aging parents tend to talk to others about the experience, because it is or can be such a jarring thing to all of a sudden have this need and not know how to navigate it. So, our people can offer help, and we do.
Adrienne, what experience or referrals do you have with Place for Mom? Because I mentioned it, and you said, "Oh yeah, I know that place very well."
But I wanted to know my mother-in-law did not need help with assisted daily living. She needed basically a companion. We didn't want her. She was 90 years old with lymphoma. She was going through treatment. She needed someone to go with her, and I mean, I was dealing with my husband's cancer too at the time. So we brought in 5 different women so that she was part of the process and could choose the woman that she connected with. Now, how do you work as far as that goes if it's going to be somebody that's in the home? Does the patient have the ability to make some sort of selection, or how does it work?
So, a Place for Mom doesn't operate, agencies of any sort, right? So we would send you a referral to a home care company or organization that could provide that. And what I would suggest is, we know that home care and the success of home care is so dependent on that fit, right? I mean, it is such a thing about fit and approach. And so, what we tell people who are looking at home care as an option is to absolutely sit down with the home care company, they usually do an assessment in the home. So they meet the resident, they see the home, they see what they're dealing with, and really talk about the things that are important. If you're talking with, about your dad, and he's kind of a curmudgeon and doesn't like to engage, and, you don't want somebody who's like Mary Poppins coming in and wanting to sing a happy tune, right? You want somebody who's going to do what he needs, stay out of the way, be there for assistance, but, don't get on his last nerve.
Hopefully he'll warm up to her.
Yeah.
Would you please define the word curmudgeon for those who don't know?
Oh, absolutely. Somebody who is maybe a little salty, sometimes sarcastic and not wanting to engage, and somebody who doesn't want anybody in their business. for the most part, right? And so a difficult thing to walk into as a caregiver, especially somebody who's an empathetic caregiver. And so but it's, that's his home, that's his environment, and you need to be prepared for that. And so with everything, the more honest you can be about the resident and their needs, the better match that you can find. And we find that when we talk to families, they're sometimes adult children are oftentimes in denial about what a parent really needs. They tend to underplay the amount of care or assistance somebody needs because they're looking at their parent through the child's filter. And they think that this is what mom used to do, but mom may not want to do that any longer, right? And so it's really about understanding the residents' desires, where they're most comfortable. We talk a lot about, the greatest generation going through senior care right now. They're not a generation that cared about chandeliers and fixtures and finishes, right? They're a generation that did without themselves so their children could have more. And, we're, for the most part, not real fancy in the environments that they chose. And so sometimes adult children look for something that's entirely different. And so understanding the resident, what their needs are, where they're most comfortable, really allows us, as we're talking to families, to find the right environment. And just like with home care, it's all about the fit.
Yeah, I know. Since we're on the go ahead, Adrienne.
I just have another question about if someone really wants home care, but needs for their mental health and really their health, overall health, companionship and socialization. How do you get that person to accept that decision and move into that role?
Yeah, and let me piggyback my question because they're very similar. I was going to say, since we're on the subject of curmudgeons, it sounded like you were describing every elderly person who is faced with the decision that their kids are making for them of going into an unfamiliar territory. What's the best way to win over one of them?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that are important. One is, very few people understand what today's senior living looks like, right? So when we talk to adult children, we're usually, if their parent is in their 80s, we're talking to an adult child in their 60s, and they may have visited a grandparent in what they called a nursing home at that point. And we're talking about the linoleum hallways and the wheelchairs lined up, and that's their vision of what senior living is, right? And so if you were to ask somebody like that, when do you want to move your mom or dad into senior living? The 12s of never may come up, right, for them. But if they were to see today's senior living, right, with a movie theater and restaurant-style meals and, engagement and volunteer opportunities, all kinds of different things that are functional in today's senior living, they may say, hey, not so bad, mom or dad needs that socialization. I see other seniors participating in things that I know my mom or dad would like. This might not be so bad. So the first step is for the adult child to truly understand it, because when you're faced with, being discharged from a skilled nursing facility in 48 hours and you've got to find some place to move a senior, you're grappling with what to do, and you have this antiquated notion of what senior living is. It just compounds the problem. So for the adult child to understand what it is, they can then, make an informed decision and include mom or dad in that decision, right? There are a couple of communities here. This one has an opportunity for gardening. This one doesn't. This one, if you're talking about moving a dad, sometimes the male population in the community makes all the difference. We know that senior living communities are 80+% women, and sometimes that sounds great to a man, and sometimes it sounds like the worst place on earth.
Fresh
if he
meat,
can't.
they date like they're in junior high over there. It's
Yeah.
They can, or that men just think, they've listened to women nagging at them their whole lives and they don't want it any longer. So, it's just really understanding the environment, and once you do that, you can position it in a much more positive way to a parent, and you can really say, hey, you love to do these things. You're not doing them for yourself any longer because you can't. If you can go into this environment and have, your meals taken care of, but there are people around to engage with you in this way, I actually think that you'll do better. And I'm concerned about you, and you need to know that, and, this isn't a tenable situation that we've got. So let's together come up with the right solution.
Now, obviously, it goes without saying that caregiving is a very stressful job. I call it one of the deadliest occupations around, right up there with disarming nuclear warheads and stuff like that. What's your personal experience with caregiving? Because you sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I both my father, who passed last year, and my mother-in-law, who passed 5 years ago now, I helped in their caregiving plan. And for my mother-in-law, she had Alzheimer's and, plateaued at a certain point, but it was a pretty brutal progression for her. And so helped my father-in-law to understand that. He was somebody who had seen his brother-in-law care for his wife at home and was going to tough it out and be valiant and wanted to be that caregiver if it killed him or not, and it was heading there. And so helped him to see that when he was a caregiver, it was important to him to do all the right things. And so he was great at making sure, he had fresh laundry, and my mother-in-law, was not in soiled clothes or things like that. So for him, that was his vision in his mind. That was his duty. But he didn't provide any social stimulation or cognitive stimulation. He was taking care of stuff largely around her, but not with her. And so he chose to attend a college reunion. And so for a respite, I was able to get him to decide to have my mother-in-law stay at a local senior living community. And to see her perk up in that week was incredible, with all the stimulation and the socialization and all of that. She ate better. She would allow a shower, all of these kinds of things that are such a challenge to caregivers. And so when he got back, we talked about that, and it was really an emotional discussion. He was trying to do the best he possibly could for her and do right by her, but was hurting himself physically. I mean, he had, high blood pressure by that time. His back had gone out a couple of times. He was running himself into the ground, and she wasn't better off. So getting him to see that combination was a challenge without offending him and all of the great things he was trying to do. So that was that experience. And then my father was a totally different experience. My father was a bit of a curmudgeon who didn't believe in doctors, had not been to a doctor, had no cognitive issues, and was just starting to feel a little bit sick in that last year of his life, and so started slowing down, and so helped my mom to understand, who's 10 years his junior and teaches senior yoga, and starts her morning with a 3-mile walk just to get a smile on her face, to understand that he was at a different phase and what that meant to him, and allowing him to age and slow down in an appropriate way. And very thankful that he went into an emergency room on a Friday and was dead by Sunday. He had a tumor that exploded and took him immediately, and he would never have done anything about any diagnosis that he had been given. And so it was a blessing to him as a human being, and to my mom at never having to play that terrible caregiver role. So I have it from two different sides of yet another spectrum, and am able to see kind of into that and understand that, like I said, it's very different for everybody, and you've just got to find the right solution. And there's no shame in either choosing to muscle it out if that's what you're going to try and do, or in admitting that this is killing you and you've got to find a better solution.
Yeah, roll the dice, play the odds, be the long shot. You might get lucky, but probably not. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about, you brought up an interesting point about, the isolation. He was taking care of everything around her, but not her. Now with COVID-19, I'd like to talk about your perspective on all these seniors and the isolation, and the family can't come and visit. So we'll be right back. Don't go away. Dave Nassaney, the Caregiver's Caregiver, has just released his 6th book entitled It's My Life Too, Thrive to Stay Alive as a Caregiver. It was specifically written for caregivers who know they should be putting their needs first, but just don't know how. Dave is the sole caregiver to his wife, Charlene, since 1996. He knows firsthand what caregivers are going through, because he is one. He now speaks all across the country, offering caregivers his amazing caregiver support package. Even the airlines tell us that in the event of an emergency, to put your oxygen mask on first, before you help your child with their mask. They know that those who don't heed their advice often black out, thus becoming unable to help either themselves or their child. And caregivers are exactly the same way. It's My Life Too, Thrive and Stay Alive as a Caregiver will help caregivers who are neglecting their sleep, diet, and social life and learn to put their needs first. Pick up your copy today or buy one for your special caregiver, on sale everywhere and at caregiverdave.com. And we're back with Sue Johansen and my lovely co-host Adrienne Gruberg. I'm Dave Nassaney, Caregiver Dave. And I want to talk about COVID-19. And, everyone talks about the effect of COVID-19 on children if they don't return to school. What's the effect on seniors who are isolated and can't get visitors? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think, we've got seniors who are at home and isolated, and going to a grocery store right now is a difficult thing to do. And so I think, more than ever, I think this is allowing families to see that for somebody who isn't able to be nimble and to, prepare for themselves and all of this, that they need a game plan, right? I think COVID has taught us all a lot of lessons as we've lived through it. We've seen the disparity of experience for lots of people in the world, depending on what you have access to. And I think for seniors who don't have access to food and medications and the things that they need to keep healthy, it's a terrible time. And so I think, we've seen in our business that after the president made the announcement about the pandemic, that changed the consumer mindset. And so we started getting people who decided that they were going to hold off making any decisions to see what this was all about. And so the people that we were helping in April, probably for the most part, were those who literally had no choice. Right? They had to make a decision. It was a hospital discharge or something like that. And then as May and June came around, we saw that the lingering effects of COVID for people at home, the isolation, the increasing, long time isolation where maybe adult children were struggling to try and keep up with them and the things that they were dealing with, we started to see people approach COVID differently, and certainly by June and into July began to what I refer to as normalize it, right? So, start to look at saying, okay, mom and dad are in a difficult space. COVID doesn't represent the kind of challenge that they are facing at home without access to their medical offices were sometimes shut down. If they didn't have prescriptions being delivered, if they didn't have food being delivered, those were very real and in front of them. And COVID was a potential hazard where they had a real hazard in front of them. So we definitely saw kind of a mindset shift that happened kind of in the May to June timeframe, where people started to say, this isn't going away. I need options. I need a better environment. And so they kind of turned to senior living options in the senior living world as a better alternative. And then I would say on the flip side of that, senior living communities, they we keep track of which ones are accepting residents, which ones aren't, which ones you can visit, who's doing physical tours versus virtual tours, and really keeping people informed of, again, what their options are and what's happening in senior living. So it's really presented a new challenge.
There was so much publicity about the amount of COVID in senior residences. Were families less likely to take the parent who could be living with them for who knows how long,
right? Yeah,
for a period of time, and then say, well, let's see what happens? Or do you think they?
So that's what we started.
Was a place for mom able to evaluate where to put that person, based on the kind of results the particular residents had?
Sure. Yeah, I think, kind of what we saw at first was that reticence that you're talking about, right? I'll move mom in with me, or if that's not possible, I'll wait. The let's wait it out thing, this is not going to last very long, right? And so we saw, we've done benchmarking surveys with families throughout the COVID timeframe. And so, when we did our first family surveys in early April, families were saying that, COVID represented, a big part of their decision making, more important than some other things. And then we benchmarked that every 3 weeks during COVID to where we saw that percentage of what COVID represented in their decision making shrink every month, right? It's like as this continues on, like I said, there are real dangers that we're seeing, with mom and dad versus this potential danger. And so, just like people are learning to work around, they're not maybe having to, wash down, every box that they bring into their home, or, every time they go to the grocery store, they're not shifting things into different containers as maybe they thought they needed to do it first. They're beginning to normalize it a little bit. So that's certainly what we saw. And again, we kind of immediately snapped into action and started producing what is now a pretty big database of every single senior living community that we work with across the country, what their status is. Are they, open or closed for new residents? And as I said, do they have dining in the dining rooms, or are people still getting meals in their apartments? And are they resuming activities? Can they get visitors? And so helping to understand those things and helping to position those for families gives them a sense of, okay, here's what's happening in senior living, and here's where I can feel comfortable, here's where I can't. The number one reason that families are holding off now is not so much that they're afraid of the disease, because 90% of the deaths happened in skilled nursing facilities and not really in assisted living communities. But it's that fear of, if I move mom or dad in now and I'm not able to visit, how will I feel and how will my mom or dad feel? And so it's really about, which communities are doing what to facilitate that. How can we visit? Sometimes they're called porch visits, where they can get together in an area, in a courtyard in the community. And so it's really about finding ways to work around what the dangers are and normally
make it work.
Experience. Yep.
So with my mother and my mother-in-law, there were different stages of need. I mean, at first she lived in her own home, and then she needed some help, so her sister moved in with her, and they were getting along. But then my mother started having some memory issues and was driving her sister crazy. Instead of being passionate and understanding, she would yell at her and say, well, I just told you that. Why can't you remember, just totally clueless about that. So we had to separate the two. So we put them in independent living in 2 different buildings because they would have killed each other. And that worked out for a while. What do you say to the people who, there's no problem now. Everything's fine. I always tell people, in my book, that if you're not a caregiver, just wait. You're either going to become one or you're going to need one. There's no escaping it. Now is the time to prepare to become a caregiver. And, don't just wait till it's, because one day you're normal and the next day, boom, your parent falls down, breaks a hip, and boom, you're a caregiver, and now
Right.
you don't have time to scratch your head. So how much preparation should be done when things are normal, when this is the last thing you're thinking about, putting mom somewhere or dad somewhere, they seem healthy enough, they're living together, they take care of each other, but that can change like that, can it?
Exactly, and it does oftentimes, right? And so having those conversations early with your parent and putting a game plan together. And sometimes people are confused about, what that means and how do I approach that conversation. And so, starting with the words, "Hey, Mom, I really want to have this conversation so you can
You had me at hey
participate."
mom.
Right.
Yeah, the hey mom conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
they know that's coming.
they do, and in positioning it in a way that we're having it now. Look, I'm not concerned about you today, but we're going to have this conversation now because at a certain point when we really need it, you're not going to want to have it. And so let's have it today and set a game plan, right? And
Like
so
the prepaid burials, right?
exactly. But I do think that there are some things that, people talk about, well, how do you know when the time is right? And when somebody, especially if you're dealing with cognitive issues, they expect the parent to make these decisions for themselves when they don't have the cognitive ability to do that. And so that's really unfair to the parent. And so the child has to assume that role at a certain point. But if you're able to talk about milestones with a parent, if you're able to say, okay, when you're not able to, go grocery shopping and, get yourself nutritious meals any longer, I think it's time for us to have that, to really have a plan in place where you can be in an environment that provides that. When you're not able to drive any longer and I'm not able to drive you around, then we really need to make a plan. So I think people feel
the taking the keys discussion.
Hiding the keys, exactly. And I think, but I think adult children feel more comfortable talking about milestones than they do about, like, I'm going to take you from your home, right? And so everybody can agree on milestones to a certain extent, right? I mean, somebody who's healthy, a parent that's healthy, when you're no longer able to do this, they often will say, well, yeah, if I get to that point, okay. Right, and so because they think that it's a ways off, but it could happen tomorrow. And so I think agreeing on some milestones, getting their overall philosophy, so that if you have to, as an adult child, take the parent role and make these decisions, that when you spoke to your parents when they were fully cognitively aware, they made their wishes known, and you agreed to kind of what was going to happen. It takes some of the sting out of it when an adult child has to take over that parent role. So I think early and often is what I would suggest about having these conversations, so that you remove, the stigma from having the conversations when somebody's already not doing well, and the trauma and the emotional nature. You've had it, you've set a game plan, and then later it's just about enacting that plan. And so that's what allows an adult child to feel better about it when those tough decisions come.
Yeah.
I have a question. My father was diagnosed with cancer at about 80. My mother was 79, 78. And it was his idea that they should move from their senior, that it wasn't a group home, or, it was just a senior living, it was a big senior living center.
Like adult active, kind of
adult
lifestyle.
Lots of golf courses, all that stuff. And he felt that because he might not be around, he wanted her in a place that would progress with her needs as she needed them. But they would have an apartment, move their furniture in as much as they needed, and as her needs grew, that she would be able to stay in the same place but go to the next level of care.
Yeah.
Are there any of those facilities that are a place for mom?
Absolutely. Yeah, aging in place is an important part of senior living, right? And that's why we try, when we talk to families, really plan for, okay, here's where they are today, but what may come, right? And so somebody who is moving into an independent living only community, you know that chances are they're going to have to make another move at some point, right? And so you want to make sure that you anticipate those and help a family to understand that the fewer transitions a senior goes through, the better, especially if you're dealing with somebody with cognitive issues. Change is extremely hard for most of us, but for somebody with cognitive issues, it's really difficult. And so we want to make sure that we get somebody into an environment where they can age in place, and that means that there are increasing service and care levels that they can go to manage essentially until end of life, right? And they may layer on hospice or palliative care, or they may, if they have something invasive, need to go to skilled nursing as a last resort. But with most assisted living communities, especially those with memory care neighborhoods within them, a senior can age in place and can they can take them through end of life. And so that discussion is really important, because especially if a family comes to us a little bit later in their journey and there's already a pretty high care need, really getting them into the right environment that can see that care level increase through time is important, so we don't have to make another change for the family. So, understanding what their needs are. If you have somebody with a degenerative disease like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or, most anything today, you know that care needs are only going to increase.
But the financial aspects of it vary.
Yeah. I was going to ask about the cost, but before we do that, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Yep. And we're back with Sue Johansen and Adrienne Gruberg, my co-host, and I'm Caregiver Dave. So let's talk about cost. What does all this stuff cost? And, a lot of people can't afford it, but there are ways that you can pay, right? And also the second part of that question is almost a joke, but it's not a joke, because a lot of people now are taking world cruises, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and it's costing less than a full-blown, independent living or nursing home or, my mother was paying $3,500 a month for her facility. I have a long care policy that will pay up to $12,000 a month. And I think I'd rather just go on a cruise, get entertainment, get good food, So let's talk about that possibility and the cost of your traditional senior living options.
Sure, absolutely. So, yes, there are costs associated with senior living, and we talked about the spectrum earlier. Obviously, those that are just independent living, it's essentially the cost of an apartment and the food and housekeeping, if you will. It's really where you start to layer on care services that senior living can get much more costly. And so it depends on the acuity of care that somebody needs to really what the budget impact is going to be. And so most senior living communities have what they call kind of base board and care, which is the apartment and the food and the transportation and activities. That is all bundled into one, and they assess care needs separately. And so you start to begin to see what the baseline is, and they oftentimes have care services bundled into levels. Like somebody is a low care, may just need medication management, and then they go to medium care, which means some assistance with bathing, that kind of thing. And very high acuity care could mean somebody who needs a two-person transfer from, bed to a wheelchair, or, total care with bathing and incontinence, both bowel and bladder, those kinds of things. And so you really, you need to understand the care services necessary to understand the cost. We have a couple of tools on our website that talk about the senior living cost index across the country, trying to get a relative comparison so people can get a sense of that. I have talked about the around the world cruise, or somebody going into a Holiday Inn instead of going into a senior living community. And I think there are a few things about that. One is, I think when you're well, that sounds awesome, right? To get on a cruise and go around the world and see sights and those kinds of things. There are no care services aboard any of the cruise ships, right? So that could be an option for somebody who was very independent and they had that budget and wanted to spend it that way. Usually they're comparing that kind of cost to somebody at a pretty high acuity care environment, and so the two aren't interchangeable. I would hate for somebody to think that when they've got high care needs, they're going to get on board a ship and they're going to be taken care of at that level, right? That's just not the case. And so
maybe that's why they need to do it now.
Exactly.
when
they
can,
Right. And I do think there is an element of, especially for those that have degenerative cognitive issues, right, is I always tell families, spend for a great environment when they're able to take advantage of the services and amenities that are offered, right? Because there is very specific evidence about the fact that you can plateau somebody's cognitive decline with stimulation and music and small motor activities. And if somebody is getting the kind of care that they need and stimulation, then they can have a healthier, happier life longer. Whereas if you are at the end of your Alzheimer's journey, it probably makes less difference what kind of meals are in a dining room and those kinds of things. You're just not there. And so really understanding how to get the most out of the different senior living environments at the different segments of somebody's journey is really an important part of that. So I say, if somebody is going to run through their funds at a certain point, I say put somebody in the right environment where they're able to engage socially, get the most out of the programming, and then you can go on a spend down and be in a different environment as they're at the end of life. And that makes more sense to me.
Like I tell my kids, make sure you put me at Malibu overlooking the ocean. He says, Dad, if you don't know who you are, we're putting you in a cheap place.
Exactly, right? If it doesn't matter, if you could be in Malibu all day long by staring at a wall, right, because you're in Malibu in your mind, more power to you. But, so I really think that the people need to understand the progression of the disease that they're dealing with, the progression of aging, and engage people when they can engage, right? Make sure that that experience is the best that it can be. And then when it matters less and actual safety is a bigger concern, are you getting the medications that you need and the care? That's when you're in an environment where all the bells and whistles really don't add much.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing how fast time is flying. We've only got a few minutes left. Is there things that you want to talk about that we have not discussed yet? And then we'll give you your contact information at the very end there.
Sure. I think knowing that there are people available who understand this world and can help you navigate in and of itself is something that I hope is helpful to families. And if, nobody wants really to talk about this much until you need to, so to kind of slip that in the back of their mind that when you're faced with this challenge, that there are people that can help you navigate through it. And as we talked about earlier, trying to set a game plan. If your parents are well now, time to have that conversation and set a game plan and prepare for that so that it doesn't come as a shock to everybody and you're not dealing with, perhaps a hospital stay or a difficult health situation at the same time you're scrambling to make choices, right? That emotional nature of dealing with those two things at once is what makes this so difficult and why people talk about it. Not only are you dealing with coming to grips with what your parents' health is, what's happened to their health, but you're also then trying to take the lead and navigate something that you've got no experience with. So knowing that there are options and help available hopefully will be helpful to people.
And I'm sure you've run into people, caregivers, who are just killing themselves because after you ask them questions, you find that this person they're caring for requires 24/7 care, getting up in the middle of the night, turning them over so they don't get bed sores, etc.
Yeah.
What do you tell those people that just believe, no, I promised I would never put my mom in a nursing home and this and that, and they're going to sacrifice themselves, and no loved one would want their loved one to do that. I wouldn't want my kids to do that for me, and my parents wouldn't want me to do that for them. So how do you get through to these people that you're just killing yourself? The time has come to go into a facility. You can no longer take care of them by yourself.
I think sometimes it's flipping that, because we always want to go to the health of the caregiver first. And when somebody's in that mindset, they're not thinking of themselves first. So it's helping them to understand that they as one person can't really provide the care that's going to make their loved one, as well as they can be, because they're only one person. So by the time they fall down, kind of like my father-in-law's experience, right? He's doing all of this, but he's not really giving my mother-in-law everything she needed to be as well as she could be for as long as possible. So if you can shift the conversation a little bit and talk about the fact that, through no fault of their own, they can't meet all the needs of their spouse any longer. And that's not good for either of them, right? It's not good for the spouse, and it's not good for them.
And I'm thinking a good facility would make your loved one happier, because now she has all these new friends that they're making, and Correct. She's getting, regular meals, and many of the diets are pretty good. I used to eat at my mother's place, and I'd say, man, this is good stuff. I wouldn't mind living here if I had to. And the activities, they do fun things. They go on outings if they can. They have a lot of cool toys and games that they play in there. And let's not forget that romance is going on over there.
Exactly, yeah. And again, then you can retain the spouse relationship, right? If you're no longer the caregiver, you can visit your wife at the senior living community. She's happy. She can introduce you to some new friends that she's made, and you're not killing yourself. And so,
hopefully
it's
she's not cheating on me over there. Hopefully she's not cheating on me over there too.
Well, maybe it's time. Who knows?
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. You've covered a lot of territory. How can somebody get a hold of you if they want to just bend your ear and talk, or you can send them brochures of the different kinds of options? What is your typical phone call?
Yeah, so reaching out to aplaceformom.com, puts you in touch with a senior living advisor in your area, right? And so you can start to have the conversation, as you talked about before, of here's what's happening with me, what are the options, and we'll hear you out regardless of whether it's time for you to be in a senior living community. So really logging onto our website is a good first step.
And as I recall, you guys get back to us really quickly, like sometimes the same day, at the most the next day.
Yeah. Usually within 10 minutes, we'll be back with you.
Wow.
Yeah. So we know that sometimes families are calling us from, rehab facilities or hospitals where they're in the middle of, an urgent situation. So we're very respectful of that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate you coming on and contacting us, because you contacted us and we said, yes, sounds like you're great guests. For those of you out there listening to us and watching us on the different platforms, we are going to see you next week. So goodbye, and God bless you. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.